Australia uses three main time zones. Australian Western Standard Time. Time is regulated by the individual state governments, some of which observe daylight saving time. Australia's external territories observe different time zones. Standard Time was introduced in the 1890s when all of the Australian colonies adopted it. Before the switch to Standard Time zones, each local city or town was free to determine its local time, called local mean time. Now, Western Australia uses Western Standard Time. South Australia and the Northern Territory use Central Standard Time, while New South Wales, Queensland, Tasmania, Victoria, Jervis Bay Territory, and the Australian Capital Territory use Eastern Standard Time. Daylight saving time is used in states in the south and southeast. South Australia, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, and the ACT. It is not currently used in Western Australia. The Northern Territory or Queensland, Norfolk Island has NFT and during summer has NFDT. The standardization of time in Australia began in 1892, when surveyors from the 6 colonies in Australia met in Melbourne for the Intercolonial Conference of Surveyors. The delegates accepted the recommendation of the 1884 International Meridian Conference to adopt Greenwich Mean Time as the basis for Standard Time. The colonies enacted time zone legislation, which took effect in February 1895. The clocks were set ahead of GMT by 8 hours in Western Australia, by 9 hours in South Australia, and by 10 hours in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, and Tasmania. The 3 time zones became known as Western Standard Time, Central Standard Time, and Eastern Standard Time. Broken Hill in the far west of New South Wales also adopted Central Standard Time due to it being connected by rail to Adelaide but not Sydney at the time. In May 1899, South Australia advanced Central Standard Time by 30 minutes after lobbying by businesses who wanted to be closer to Melbourne time and cricketers and footballers who wanted more daylight to practice in the evenings, disregarding the common international practice of setting 1-hour intervals between adjacent time zones. Attempts to correct these oddities in 1986 and 1994 were rejected. When the Northern Territory was separated from South Australia and placed under the jurisdiction of the federal government, that territory kept Central Standard Time. Likewise, when the ACT and Jervis Bay Territory were broken off from New South Wales, they retained Eastern Standard Time. Since 1899, the only major changes in Australian time zones have been setting of clocks half an hour later than Eastern Time on the territory of Lord Howe Island, and Norfolk Island changing from UTC plus 11:30 to UTC plus 11 o'clock on the 4th of October 2015. When abbreviating Australian Central Time and Australian Eastern Time. In domestic contexts, the leading Australian may be omitted. However, the prefix A is often used to avoid ambiguity with the time zone abbreviations CST and EST, referring to the Central and Eastern time zones in North America. Though the governments of the states and territories have the power to legislate variations in time, the standard time within each of these is set related to Coordinated Universal Time as determined by the International Bureau of Weights and Measures and set by Section 8AA of the National Measurement Act of 1960 of the Commonwealth. Australia has kept a version of the UTC atomic time scale since the 1990s. But Greenwich Mean Time remained the formal basis for the standard times of all of the states until 2005. In November 2004, the State and Territory Attorneys General endorsed a proposal from the Australian National Measurement Institute to adopt UTC as the standard of all Australian standard times, thereby eliminating the effects of slight variations in the rate of rotation of the Earth that are inherent in mean solar time. All states have adopted the UTC standard, starting on the 1st of September 2005. In Victoria, South Australia, Tasmania and the ACT, the starting and ending dates of daylight saving times are officially determined by proclamations, declarations, or regulation made by the state governor or by the responsible minister. Such instruments may be valid for only the current year, and so this section generally only refers to the legislation In New South Wales and Western Australia, the starting and ending dates, if any, are to be set by legislation. Western Standard Time, UTC plus 8 o'clock Central Standard Time, UTC plus 9:30 Eastern Standard Time, UTC plus 10 o'clock. The choice of whether to use DST is a matter for the governments of the individual states and territories. However, during World War I and World War II, all states and territories used daylight saving time. In 1968, Tasmania became the first state to use DST in peacetime, followed in 1971 by New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, South Australia, and the Australian Capital Territory. Western Australia and the Northern Territory did not adopt it. Queens,